A poor little girl falls in the street while running in the rain. But when the young billionaire lifts her up and looks at her, he whispers, "Oh my God, she's identical to my daughter who passed away." And he begins to cry non-stop. The rain was pouring down as if the sky had decided to unleash its entire weight upon the city. Elijah Marshall walked alone through the nearly empty streets, protected only by a black umbrella that seemed insignificant against the fury of the storm. The water pounded the pavement so hard it formed a low mist, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. He didn't need to be out there. With his money, he could have been anywhere in the world, sheltered in one of his mansions, protected by drivers and assistants. But ever since the fire, Elijah preferred to walk alone, to feel the city, even on days like that. That's when he heard it. A small cry followed by a dull thud, almost drowned out by the rain. Turning quickly, he saw a little girl lying on the wet sidewalk about 60 feet away. "Are you all right?" Elijah ran toward her, holding his umbrella against the wind that threatened to rip it out of his hands. The girl, no more than 5 years old, was trying to get up, her knees and hands scraped by the rough concrete. Her light brown hair was soaked, plastered to her small tanned-round face. She wasn't crying. She merely bit her lower lip with determination. Her clothes were simple, a patched jacket and a pair of worn-out sneakers that looked like they'd been donated. "Let me help you," Elijah said, kneeling beside her and shielding her with his umbrella. It was at that moment she looked up. The world stopped. The sound of the rain, the strong wind, the distant headlights, all of it vanished in an instant. Elijah felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach, so hard it knocked every bit of air from his lungs. Those eyes, grayish-green with small brown flecks near the iris, the gentle curve of the chin, the freckles sprinkled across the nose like delicate constellations. Rosie. His Rosie. "Mister, are you okay?" The child's voice brought him back to reality. It couldn't be. Rosie was gone. The fire report, the remains. He himself had identified the few belongings found in the rubble. "I'm fine," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Are you hurt?" "Just a little. But I can't cry. My mom says I'm a strong girl." Elijah helped her to her feet, his hands trembling. Every movement, every expression she made was like a ghost from his memory. The way she tilted her head slightly to the side when she spoke, how she rubbed her nose when she was nervous. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Lily," she replied, adjusting her small, soaked jacket. "And you?" "Elijah," he answered automatically. "Where's your mum, Lily?" "She's still working. She cleans big houses on the other side of town. She won't be back till late tonight." "Do you live nearby by yourself?" Elijah asked, worried. "Yes, I live with my mom, Clara, in those little houses down there." Lily pointed to the end of the street. "I went out to buy bread for dinner because we ran out." She showed a small plastic bag, now drenched. Elijah's heart tightened. Such a little child, alone in the rain just to get food. "Let me walk you home." "It's too dark and rainy for a girl to be out here alone." Lily seemed to think this over for a moment, narrowing her eyes as though deciding whether she could trust him. "Okay. My mom always says not to talk to strangers, but you helped me, so you're not totally a stranger, right? And you have nice clothes, like the people my mum cleans for." An involuntary smile tugged at Elijah's lips. The child's simple, direct logic was so reminiscent of Rosie it hurt. They started walking along the slippery sidewalk, Elijah keeping the umbrella over the girl. With each step, every glance, every exchanged word, the sense of unreality grew. Questions piled up in his mind. How was this possible? Who was this girl? Who was Clara? "It's over there." Lily pointed to a row of small wooden houses beside a vacant lot. The structures looked makeshift, almost like shacks arranged in some semblance of order. An attempt at a small community amid the poverty. "I live in the third one." The structure was simple. Plywood walls, a metal roof, a single small window at the front. The rain pounded on the tin roof with a noise that must make it impossible to sleep on nights like that. In the tiny front yard, there was an improvised clothesline with some garments now soaked by the downpour. "It's small, but it's our home," Lily said with a simple pride that made Elijah feel something strange in his chest. "Does your mom know you went out alone?" "Sort of," Lily shrugged. "Sometimes I have to help out. Mom works a lot to pay rent and my school." Elijah looked at the simple house, feeling an inexplicable urgency not to let the girl go. To find out more. To be sure. "Lily, how old are you?" 5.5, she answered proudly, holding out her hand and then bending one finger halfway. 5.5. Rosie would be 8 now. It made no sense. And yet... "Thanks for the umbrella, Mr. Elijah." Lily grinned, a smile he knew so well it made his heart ache. "I've got to go in now. Mrs. Johnson next door is probably wondering where I am." "Sure," he said, still dazed. "Be careful with those scraped knees." She waved and ran to the little house, unlocking the door with a key she pulled from her jacket pocket. Elijah stood in the rain, watching the simple door she had disappeared behind. Water now ran down his face, his hair, his clothes, but he barely felt it. Images of the fire filled his mind, merging with Lily's face, identifying the remains, the funeral without a body, the years of mourning and isolation, and now this simple little girl with the face of his daughter. Elijah took a deep breath and looked at the house's small window, where a faint light had just turned on. He decided he wouldn't leave. Not yet. He had to know more about Lily and Clara. He had to understand if he was going crazy, or if, by some miracle, part of his destroyed world still existed. He crossed the street and waited under the awning of an abandoned bus stop, watching the house. The rain kept falling, but Elijah no longer cared about being wet. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something besides pain. A spark of something dangerous, powerful, and fragile. Hope. The next morning, Elijah was back. He parked his inconspicuous car a few blocks away and walked to the bus stop with a view of the small wooden house. He wore simpler clothes today, jeans, a blue shirt, and a dark jacket he never used in business meetings. He wanted to draw less attention. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still grey. Elijah checked his watch. 6:40 a.m. Sleep had not come the night before. How could it? His mind was filled with questions, theories, and a hope so painful it almost suffocated him. At 6:53, the door of the third house opened. A woman stepped out, holding Lily's hand. Clara, he presumed. She was young, maybe around 30, thin, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Even from a distance, Elijah could see the exhaustion in her slumped shoulders. She wore what looked like a grey cleaning uniform and carried a heavy bag. Lily, meanwhile, wore a simple dress and a colourful school backpack, probably the only new item she had. They walked to the bus stop on the other side of the street, about 300 feet away from where Elijah stood. "Behave at school today," he heard Clara say as he approached unnoticed. "Mrs. Johnson will pick you up." "Okay, Mum, you're not working late again, right?" "I'll try to come back earlier," Clara replied, kissing the top of the girl's head. The bus arrived, and after one more hug, Lily got on. Clara stood watching until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Only then did her shoulders slump a bit more, as if now she could reveal how tired she truly was. Elijah took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound casual. "Sorry to bother you. You're Lily's mum, right?" Clara turned with a start, immediately on guard. "Who are you? How do you know my daughter?" Her voice was firm despite her fatigue, her eyes alert. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. My name is Elijah. Yesterday, I helped Lily when she fell in the rain, near the bakery." Clara's face relaxed slightly, though her wariness remained. "Oh, that was you. She told me a kind man helped her." Clara studied his face for a moment. "Thank you for that. But why are you here now?" Elijah had rehearsed this part. "Actually, I'm new to this neighborhood. I'm looking for someone to help clean my place once a week. Lily mentioned you work doing that. Clara blinked in surprise. You don't look like you're from around here. I just moved here. I'm on Maple Street, 3 blocks away. One of the simpler streets in the area, yet still much better than this place. It was a believable lie, Elijah thought. Clara checked her cheap watch. I need to catch my bus in 5 minutes or I'll be late for work. I can drive you, Elijah offered, gesturing in the direction of where he'd parked. We can talk on the way. Clara hesitated, sizing him up. Elijah knew what she saw, a man too well dressed, even in simple clothes, likely well-intentioned, but still a stranger. No, thanks. I'd rather take the bus. She started walking toward the stop. But if you really want to hire a cleaning lady, we can talk another day. I'll give you my number. She pulled a small notepad from her bag and wrote down a number. How much do you usually pay per hour? Elijah asked, taking the slip of paper. $15, Clara replied. Then, blushing slightly, she added, but I can do it for $13 if it's a regular job. Elijah nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. $13 an hour. He spent more than that on a single coffee at the tower where his office was located. How about starting tomorrow? Let's say 9 in the morning. I can come pick you up. The bus was approaching the stop. Clara looked torn. All right, I only have a job in the afternoon tomorrow. She was already moving. But just meet me here, no need to drive me. Clara stepped onto the bus without looking back, and Elijah stood there watching the vehicle pull away. She was cautious and protective, qualities he admired, qualities of a good mother. But was she Lily's biological mother? Over the next 3 days, Elijah established a routine. Clara came to clean his place, a small apartment he had quickly rented on Maple Street. Modest by his standards, but clearly luxurious to Clara, who worked in silence, efficiently. Do you live alone? She asked on the second day, while cleaning the windows. Yes, Elijah answered, pretending to be busy on his laptop at the kitchen table. I'm an accountant. Mostly work from home. Another lie. He owned one of the largest tech companies in the country, but had been on an indefinite leave since Rosie's death. His executives managed everything while he drifted in his own grief. Lily liked you, Clara commented casually. She said you have sad eyes. The observation caught him off guard. Kids see things adults don't notice. Clara nodded. Lily's always been that way, special, observant. She paused. Ever since she was a baby. It was the first time Clara had mentioned Lily's past. Elijah tried to keep his voice casual. Did you have her very young? Clara stopped cleaning and looked out the window. For a moment, Elijah thought she wouldn't answer. I didn't have her, she finally said, still facing away from him. I found her. Elijah's heart sped up. What do you mean? Clara turned around, her eyes evaluating him as though deciding how much she could trust him. I was working as a janitor at a church 5 years ago. One winter morning, I found a baby at the back door. No one ever came to claim her. So you adopted her? Elijah kept his voice neutral, despite the storm in his chest. Not officially, Clara admitted, lowering her voice. I don't have papers. I'm an immigrant. I told the police about the abandoned baby, but I don't know, something told me to protect her. She looked at Elijah intently. I've never told anyone about this. Elijah nodded, feeling the weight of the confidence she was placing in him. Your secret's safe with me. The next day, Elijah showed up with a bag of groceries. I bought too much for just one person, he explained. Clara hesitated but accepted. The following day, it was a small space heater. Winter's coming, and I heard yours broke. He had overheard Lily mention that while talking to her mom at the front door, one of the times he watched them discreetly. Clara accepted his help with growing discomfort, but also with silent gratitude. Elijah could see she was proud yet too practical to refuse help that benefited Lily. When, on the 5th day, Elijah asked if he could visit their home to fix a leaking faucet Lily had mentioned, Clara finally confronted the situation. Why are you doing this? She asked directly. People like you don't help people like us without reason. Elijah felt the weight of all his lies, of his real identity, of his suspicions, but he couldn't reveal anything yet. "Maybe I'm just trying to be a better person," he answered, surprised at the sincerity in his own voice. "And maybe you two remind me there's goodness in the world, even when it seems impossible to find." Clara studied him for a long moment, as though she could see right through him. Finally, she nodded. "That faucet's been leaking for months. It'd be good to have it fixed." Driving home that night, Elijah knew he was getting closer to what he needed to discover. Clara had found an abandoned baby around the same time as the fire, a baby who grew into Lily, with Rosie's face. The coincidence was too big to ignore, but how and why? And the questions consumed him, alongside a growing certainty that his world was about to be turned upside down yet again. Elijah sat alone in his real apartment, a spacious penthouse in the city center, overlooking the park. The place he actually lived, not the small unit he'd rented to maintain his cover with Clara. On the coffee table, a thick folder of documents, some yellowed with age, lay open. Next to it, a half-finished glass of whiskey reflected the dim lamplight. It was 3 in the morning, but sleep was impossible. The memories, those he had tried to bury for 3 years, were flooding back with new force. With a sigh, he picked up a photo from the top of the stack. In it, a girl with grayish-green eyes smiled, hugging a brown stuffed dog. Rosie is at 5 years old, 6 months before the fire. "How did I not see it sooner?" he whispered to himself. The fire had happened on a winter night. Elijah had been on a business trip in Japan, closing a deal that would double his company's value. Caroline, his wife, had called earlier that day. They had been arguing, another fight about how he put work above the family. "Rosie asked again when you're coming back," Caroline said over the phone, her voice weary. "She's been sleeping every night with that silly stuffed dog you gave her." "Tell her I'll be home in 2 days," he replied, signing papers as he spoke. "And that I'll bring her a gift from Japan." "Gifts don't replace presents, Elijah." The call ended in palpable tension. That was the last time he spoke to her. The phone call that changed everything came at 4:17 a.m., Japan time, his personal assistant, voice trembling, telling him about the fire that consumed the east wing of his mansion, where the bedrooms were located. The gas line had exploded, apparently. A terrible accident. Elijah closed his eyes, feeling the same tightness in his chest he'd felt then. The flight home was the longest of his life. 16 hours on a private jet, imagining his house in flames, imagining. When he arrived, the mansion was still smoking. Firefighters, police, forensic investigators. Caroline's body had been found in the hallway. She'd tried to escape, but the smoke overwhelmed her. It was identified by her jewelry and wedding ring. But Rosie, the body found in her bedroom, was unrecognizable, severely burned, too small for conclusive DNA testing at the time. The investigators said the identification was made by the location it was found, the remains of her favorite pajamas, the unmistakable signs that it was her room. Elijah picked up another document from the folder, the coroner's report. The technical, clinical words trying to describe what was left of his little girl. It made him nauseous now, as it had then. "I accepted it too quickly," he whispered, running a hand over his tired face. After the funeral, closed coffins, white flowers everywhere, Elijah sank into a grief so profound it bordered on self-destruction. He sold the mansion, walked away from the company, cut himself off from the world. He couldn't even visit the graves. The pain was too great. He stood and walked to the window, gazing at the city lights. For 3 years, he'd lived like a ghost. Without Caroline, without Rosie, without a purpose, merely existing day after day, sustained by the fortune he had built and that now meant nothing, until he saw Lily fall on that wet sidewalk. He returned to the coffee table and picked up his tablet. On it was a photo of Lily he had discreetly taken while fixing the leaking faucet at her house. The girl was drawing at the small kitchen table, focused, her tongue sticking out in concentration, just like Rosie used to do. He placed the photo beside the one of Rosie. The eyes, the nose and the shape of the face. The resemblance was striking. Anyone would say they were the same child, but they couldn't be. Rosie would be 8 now, Lily was 5.5. The ages didn't match, unless... Elijah picked up the fire investigation report. He reread, for the 100th time since he'd found Lily, the details of the inquiry. Likely cause, a gas line leak. Initial explosion in the east wing. Victims identified on site. Identified. On site. Suddenly, a disturbing idea formed in his mind. What if that body wasn't Rosie's? What if, for some inexplicable reason, his daughter had been taken out of the house before the fire? He grabbed his phone and checked the time, 3:47 a.m. It didn't matter. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Marcus, it's Elijah Marshall. I know it's late, but I need your services. It's urgent." Marcus Hampton was a former cop who had worked as Elijah's head of security for years before the fire. A discreet, efficient man and most of all loyal. "Mr. Marshall, it's been a while," came the gruff voice after several rings. "What happened? I need you to investigate something for me, discreetly, about the fire." "I thought that matter was settled, sir." "So did I, Marcus. But now I'm not so sure." After hanging up, Elijah returned to the documents. There was one detail he had never fully explained. That night, the mansion's security system had been offline for almost an hour before the fire started. Investigators attributed it to an electrical fault tied to the same problem that caused the gas leak. But what if it wasn't a coincidence? He picked up another photo of Rosie, where she smiled, missing a few baby teeth. Lily had the same smile, the same eyes, the same tilt of the head when something intrigued her. The DNA report had never been completely conclusive. The remains were consistent with a child of Rosie's age and size, found in her room, but there hadn't been absolute proof of identity. Elijah felt a sudden dizziness. If it wasn't Rosie in that room, then who was it? And if his daughter was alive, why would someone take her? Why? He looked again at Lily's photo. Clara said she found her abandoned at a church door. When exactly? 5 years ago, she had said, but exactly how long ago, before or after the fire? The fire had occurred on January 22nd, 3 years ago. If Clara found Lily only a few days after, he poured more whiskey with a shaky hand. The possibilities terrified him, yet also filled him with a painful hope. If Lily were Rosie, it meant someone had orchestrated everything. The fire, the disappearance of his daughter, Caroline's death. It meant murder. It meant that for 3 years he had grieved for someone who was still alive. It meant he might have a second chance. "What if Rosie is alive?" he whispered into the empty room, the question echoing in his heart like a scream. For the first time in years, Elijah cried openly, tears of confusion, fear, and a hope so fragile it hurt. He collapsed onto the couch, physically and emotionally spent. The lingering doubt would keep him awake that night, and many nights to come, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since losing everything. If there was even the slightest chance Lily was Rosie, he would find out the truth. No matter how long it took, how much it cost, or who he had to face, because for the first time in 3 years, Elijah had something to fight for. Sunday dawned clear, a rare day of spring without clouds. Elijah drove to the row of simple houses with a toolbox on the passenger seat and a bag of groceries in the back. He had promised to fix not just the kitchen faucet, but also a window that wouldn't close properly. As he parked, he saw Lily playing in the small patch of bare yard in front of the houses. She was building something with stones and twigs, completely absorbed. Noticing his arrival, she jumped up. "Elijah, you came to fix our house." Her smile was wide, filled with a trust that hadn't been there the first time they met. "I did," he replied, feeling that familiar tightness in his chest. "Is your mum home?" "She's making coffee. Come on." Lily grabbed his hand naturally, pulling him toward the house. That small gesture, that warm little hand in his, sent a wave of emotion through Elijah that he could barely contain. Clara was in the kitchen, her hair tied in a colorful scarf, brewing coffee in an old coffee maker. The aroma filled the small, clean space. Despite the evident poverty, there was care in every corner. Patchwork curtains that matched and wildflowers in a glass cup. Lily's drawings held up on the fridge by magnets. "Good morning," she said, turning with a tired smile. "Coffee?" "I'd love some," Elijah answered, putting the toolbox down. "I brought some groceries for lunch as well," he mentioned, gesturing to the bag. Clara frowned. "You didn't have to." "I know, but I wanted to." While Elijah worked on the faucet, Lily sat on the kitchen floor, watching his every move. She asked constant questions. "Why is that wrench different? How do you know which part is broken? Do you fix things in your accounting job?" Which he answered patiently. After finishing the faucet, the three of them had lunch together at the small kitchen table. It was the first time they had shared a meal, and initially there was an uncomfortable silence. "Lily told me you brought her a game yesterday," Clara remarked, breaking the silence. Elijah nodded. "A puzzle. I hope that's all right." "It has 500 pieces, Mom. It's a castle," Lily exclaimed. Clara smiled at her daughter. "I don't mind. We're just not used to getting gifts." "Mr. Accountant is nice," Lily stated, with a child's frank simplicity. "He has sad eyes, like that dog we saw at the shelter, remember, Mum?" "Lily," Clara gently admonished. "It's okay," Elijah laughed, surprising himself. "She's right. My eyes do get sad sometimes." After lunch, while Lily played in her small bedroom, Clara and Elijah sat on the makeshift porch, just 2 wooden steps and a worn chair. She offered him another cup of coffee, which he accepted. "You never talk about your life," Clara observed, looking out at the quiet street. Elijah hesitated. "There's not much to tell." "Everyone has a story," she persisted gently. "You've heard mine, finding Lily, my struggle to raise her, but you, too. You're a mystery." The afternoon sun highlighted lines of worry around Clara's eyes that didn't match her age. There was a resilience in her that Elijah deeply admired. "I lost my family," he finally said, the words coming painfully. 3 years ago." Clara said nothing, just waited for him to continue. "My wife and my daughter. An accident. After that, I withdrew from everything and everyone." "I'm sorry," Clara murmured, and there was genuine understanding in her voice. "The pain doesn't go away, does it?" "No, it just changes shape." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that exists only between people who understand loss. "When I found Lily," Clara said quietly, "I was at my worst. I had come to this country with promises of a good job that turned out to be lies. I was alone, undocumented, cleaning a church for almost nothing, sleeping in the storage room." She sipped her coffee. "Then, on a freezing morning, I heard a faint cry. There was a baby, wrapped in blankets, left at the back door." Elijah listened intently, his heart pounding. "I should have called the police immediately, but when I held her..." Clara smiled at the memory. "Something changed in me. For the first time since arriving in this country, I felt a sense of purpose." "Do you remember the exact date?" Elijah asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Clara frowned, thinking, "Late January 5 years ago. It was so cold. It was snowing. Late January, days after the fire." Elijah took a deep breath, struggling to control his emotions. "You saved her," he said. Clara shook her head. "No, she saved me." At that moment, Lily dashed out of the house, holding up a drawing. "Look what I made." It was a simple sketch in colored pencil, 3 stick figures. One small with a dress, one taller with long hair, and a tall figure with what appeared to be a toolbox. "It's you, me, and Mr. Accountant," Lily explained, pointing to each figure. Elijah carefully held the drawing as though it were precious. "Can I keep it?" Yes, I made it for you. In the following weeks, Elijah became a frequent presence at Clara and Lily's house. He fixed things, brought children's books, and sometimes just sat on the porch talking with Clara while Lily played. One night, while helping the girl with her homework, Elijah noticed that she was watching him curiously. "What is it?" he asked, smiling. "Are you sad because you don't have a family?" The question caught him off guard. Clara, who was ironing clothes nearby, stopped what she was doing. "I used to have a family," he answered honestly, "and I miss them every single day." "You can stay with us," Lily said with simple directness. "We can be your family now." Elijah's eyes filled with tears he couldn't hold back. That would be very special. That night, as he said goodbye, Clara walked him to the door. "I'm sorry about what Lily said. Kids don't understand." "Don't worry," Elijah gently interrupted. "It was the nicest thing anyone has said to me in years." Clara studied his face for a moment, then in an unexpected gesture, lightly touched his arm. "You've been good to us, Elijah." "Thank you." Driving home, Elijah thought about that day's conversations, about Clara's story, about Lily's drawing, about the feeling of her little hand in his, the doubts and questions about the fire, about Lily's true identity, still consumed him. Marcus was still investigating discreetly, but something inside Elijah was changing. These visits, these simple talks of loss and hope, were slowly filling the void Elijah believed to be permanent. The connection he felt with Clara and Lily went beyond the possibility that Lily was his lost daughter. For the first time in 3 years, Elijah allowed himself to think about the future. A future that in some inexplicable way included a strong woman and her special daughter, living in a modest home in the poor side of town. And, as strange as it seemed, that thought made him smile. The rain had returned, falling heavily over the city. Elijah watched the droplets run down the cafe's window as he waited. The place was unassuming, in a remote neighborhood where no one would recognize him. He checked his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Marcus was late. When the door finally opened, Elijah instantly recognized the solid figure of the ex-cop. Marcus Hampton had aged in the 3 years since they last met, hair more gray, deeper lines on his face, but he still had that alert look that made him so valuable as head of security. "Mr. Marshall," Marcus said as he sat, his voice low and raspy. "Thanks for coming, Marcus. And please, it's just Elijah now." The older man nodded, ordering a coffee from the waitress before turning his full attention to his former employer. "You seem better than the last time we saw each other," he observed. Elijah tried to smile. "The last time was at the funeral." "Exactly." Silence weighed between them for a moment. Marcus had worked for Elijah for 8 years before the fire. He knew Carolyn, had seen Rosie grow up. After the tragedy, when Elijah dismissed his staff and withdrew from the world, Marcus respected his decision, staying away but always available. "You mentioned on the phone something about the fire," Marcus said, getting straight to the point. "I assumed that chapter was closed." Elijah leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I met a child, a 5.5-year-old girl named Lily." Calmly, he told Marcus about meeting Lily in the rain, about the uncanny resemblance, about Clara and the story of the abandoned baby. As he spoke, he watched his former security chief's face shift from skeptical to intrigued. "I understand your reaction," Marcus said finally. "Losing a daughter is devastating. It's natural to project." "I'm not projecting," Elijah interrupted, more sharply than intended. He took a deep breath. "Sorry, but that's not it. See for yourself." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were photos of Lily he had taken discreetly, alongside old photos of Rosie. The similarity was undeniable. Marcus studied the images with a professional eye, his face revealing no emotion. "The ages don't match," he noted. "Your daughter would be 8 years old now." "I know, it doesn't make sense, but still." "What exactly do you want me to do, Elijah?" "Investigate. Find records about a baby abandoned at the church where Clara worked." See if anyone noticed anything strange in the days following the fire. Review the forensics reports. Anything that can explain this. Elijah pointed at the photos. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. I have contacts. I can ask some discreet questions. But you need to understand, even if there's a connection, it might not be what you're hoping for. I just want the truth, Elijah replied. I need to know. Over the next 2 weeks, Elijah split his time between visiting Clara and Lily and holding discreet meetings with Marcus. The investigation progressed slowly, piece by piece. I found the police record, Marcus reported on a rainy afternoon, once again in that distant cafe. A woman named Clara Diaz did report a baby abandoned behind St. Matthew's Church on January 28, 3 years ago, 6 days after the fire. Elijah's heart pounded. What else? Standard procedure would be to place the child in social services, but Marcus consulted his notes. The social worker assigned never showed up. An Officer Reynolds noted that the woman who found the baby, being a church employee, would temporarily keep the child until everything was sorted out. And it never got sorted? Marcus shook his head. Apparently the case fell into some bureaucratic void. No documents, no follow-up. Officially, this child doesn't exist in the system. Clara mentioned that. She said Lily has no official documents. Marcus leaned back, regarding Elijah with experienced eyes. That alone doesn't prove anything about the girl's identity. I know, but it's a start. The following week, Marcus brought more puzzle pieces. I reviewed the fire records. Some intriguing inconsistencies. He opened a file on his tablet. The mansion's security system was disabled 47 minutes before the first fire alarm went off. The official report blamed an electrical malfunction related to the gas leak. But you don't believe that. That system was state-of-the-art, seen with multiple backups. The chance of a total failure is almost zero. Marcus paused. Also, I checked the security team's schedule for that night. Bill Harmon, who should have been monitoring the cameras, inexplicably took leave without a proper replacement. A chill ran down Elijah's spine. You're suggesting it was planned? I'm saying there are suspicious elements. Marcus looked him in the eye. There's more. The body found in Rosie's room. The initial report said the remains were consistent with a 5-year-old, but the detailed forensic exam indicates a significant margin of error due to the condition of the remains. Meaning? Meaning there was no absolute certainty it was Rosie. At the time, there was no reason to doubt, since it was found in her room. But theoretically, it could have been any small child. The implication was monstrous enough that Elijah had to take a moment to absorb it. You're saying someone might have placed another body there? Marcus hesitated. It's a remote possibility, but not impossible. In the days that followed, each new piece of information fueled Elijah's growing obsession. He spent sleepless nights connecting dots, forming theories. Who would benefit from abducting his daughter and faking her death? Why abandon the child afterward? And why, after 5 years, did Lily seem only 5.5 instead of 8? The answer to that last question came unexpectedly from a doctor consulted privately by Marcus. Children who experience severe trauma or extreme deprivation can show delayed development, explained the specialist in the notes Marcus handed Elijah. This includes stunted physical growth. It's not unusual for a child to appear significantly younger than her real age, especially if there was malnutrition in her early years. The final piece emerged when Marcus discovered suspicious bank transfers made by Cole Weber, Elijah's old associate, in the weeks leading up to the fire. Huge sums went to offshore accounts linked to known mercenaries. Cole? Elijah was stunned. We were like brothers. He took almost complete control of the company after you left, Marcus reminded him. And from what I found, he was practically bankrupt before the fire due to disastrous personal investments. The picture was nearly complete now, though some gaps remained. With every visit to Clara's house, Elijah felt more torn. The joy of being near the child he believed was his daughter clashed with the agony of not being able to reveal the truth. of not fully knowing the truth. Until, on a rainy afternoon, much like the day they first met, Elijah decided it was time. Clara was alone when he arrived. Lily was spending the afternoon at a friend's place, a rare moment of normal childhood that Clara insisted on providing despite their hardships. "I thought you'd come later," she said, surprised as she opened the door. Elijah looked different, paler, more tense. There was a determination in his eyes Clara had never seen before. "We need to talk," he said simply. They sat at the small kitchen table, mugs of tea between them. For several minutes, Elijah just stared at the steaming liquid as if gathering his courage. "My name isn't Elijah Reynolds, it's Elijah Marshall." Clara frowned, confused. "I don't understand." "I'm not an accountant. I'm the owner of Marshall Technologies." He watched her, waiting for a sign of recognition. "Is that some sort of company?" Clara asked, genuinely unsure. It almost made him smile. Clara lived so far from the corporate world she'd never heard of one of the biggest tech firms in the country. "Yes, a large one. But that's not what matters now." He took a deep breath. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter in a fire." In a measured tone, Elijah told her everything about Caroline and Rosie, the trip to Japan, waking up to the news of the fire, the years of solitary mourning. "Until on a rainy night, I found a girl on a sidewalk," he said, tears filling his eyes. "A girl with my daughter's face." Clara had gone pale, her hands gripping her mug. "What are you saying?" Elijah took out the folder he had brought. From it, he laid photos of Rosie on the table, side by side with recent photos of Lily. "My daughter was 5 when I thought she died." Clara stared at the pictures, shock evident on her face. The resemblance was undeniable, unsettling. "This can't be possible," she whispered. "You found Lily 6 days after the fire," Elijah went on. "In the same city, a baby left with no explanation." Clara stood abruptly, moving away from the table. "No, Lily is my daughter. Not biologically, but she's mine. I raised her. I love her." "I know that, Clara." Elijah kept his voice gentle. "And I'm forever grateful. But I need to know the truth. We need to know." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Clara looked out the window, silent tears running down her cheeks. Finally, she sat again, calmer, though her hands still trembled. "What do you want to know?" she asked in a low voice. "Everything. How you found her exactly." Clara closed her eyes, as if reliving that day. "It was very early, before sunrise. I was sleeping in the church's storage room. The pastor let me stay there in exchange for cleaning. I heard a faint cry, almost imperceptible. Her eyes opened, looking at a distant spot. I found a bundle at the back door, a baby wrapped in an old blanket, crying softly. She was cold but not freezing. She hadn't been there long." "Was there anything with her? A note? Any ID?" Clara shook her head. "Nothing. Just that blanket and a small bracelet on her wrist." Elijah's heart almost stopped. "A bracelet?" "Yes, a tiny gold bracelet. It looked too expensive for someone who'd abandon a baby. I kept it for when she grew up." "Where is it now?" Clara hesitated for a moment, then got up and went to a small chest in the living area. From it, she took out a tiny wooden box. Opening it, Elijah saw a delicate gold bracelet with a small rose charm, the bracelet he himself had given Rosie on her 4th birthday. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold it. "It's hers," he whispered. "Rosie's." Clara returned to the table, sitting heavily. "I always wondered why someone would abandon a child with something so valuable. I thought of selling it during the worst times, but it felt wrong, like it was her only link to her past." Elijah held the bracelet as though it were the most precious object in the world. "In a way, it was what happened after you found her. I called the police, as I was supposed to. An officer came, took my statement. He said a social worker would come for the baby. But hours passed and no one showed up. Clara smiled sadly. That day I had to clean the church for morning service. I carried the baby with me, improvising a sling from a sheet. She slept the whole time, so quietly. She met Elijah's gaze. When the social worker finally called, she said she was overwhelmed. There was a snowstorm and she'd come the next day. The officer suggested I keep the baby for the night, since I worked at the church and the pastor could vouch for my character. And the social worker never came, Elijah finished. Clara nodded. The next day, I called to follow up. They said there'd been a mix-up, that her case had been filed incorrectly. They'd give it priority, but needed a few more days. Her eyes filled with tears. Days turned into weeks. My calls for follow-up became less frequent, then stopped entirely. And I didn't push it anymore. I already loved her too much to let her go. Elijah understood that feeling perfectly, the instant of total, irrevocable love for a child. You saved her, Clara. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't heard that faint cry, she said, her voice cracking. I've always been thankful I was there that night. I am too. Elijah reached for her hand across the table, squeezing gently. In that moment, there was no anger or blame. Only a deep gratitude for this woman who had cared for his daughter when he believed her lost forever. What happens now? Clara asked, fear evident in her voice. It was the question Elijah dreaded, because there was no simple answer. Not yet. I still don't know the whole truth, he admitted. There are many unanswered questions. Who took Rosie out of the house? Why did they abandon her? Why does she appear younger than she should? And Lily, Clara pressed. What happens to her? To us? Elijah looked into her eyes, seeing love and fear intertwined. I know one thing for sure, Clara. You are her mother. You loved her and raised her when I couldn't. I will never forget or try to erase that. Tears rolled freely down Clara's face. But she's your daughter. And she's also yours, Elijah answered softly. I don't know how we'll work this out yet, but I promise we'll figure it out. Together. When the rain finally stopped, hours later, two people sat side by side on the small porch, united by a child and by a newly discovered truth that would change everything. The waiting room of the clinic was luxurious and discreet, located on the top floor of an office building downtown. Elijah had chosen this place carefully, a private lab renowned for its discretion and accuracy, where no one would question a billionaire requesting an urgent paternity test. It had been surprisingly easy to gather the necessary samples for the test. A cup Lily had drunk from, some strands of hair left in a brush. Clara had reluctantly agreed, understanding the need for absolute certainty, even though both already believed the truth in their hearts. Now, seated in the leather armchair, Elijah stared intently at the envelope in his hands. Dr. Marcus, the lab director, had just handed it to him personally. The results are conclusive, Mr. Marshall, the doctor had said before discreetly leaving. It's all detailed in the report. Elijah found himself unable to open it. His hands were trembling too much. Part of him wanted to delay this moment, the final instant in which doubt could still exist, because after confirmation, everything would change forever. With a deep breath, he finally tore the envelope open. The report was there, filled with technical terminology and comparative charts, but his eyes went straight to the conclusion, printed in bold, probability of paternity, 99.9998%. The world around him stopped. The words on the page seemed to pulse, growing, filling his entire vision. Lily was Rosie. His daughter was alive. Elijah rose abruptly, ignoring the receptionist who asked if he was all right. He walked like an automaton to the elevator, rode down to the parking garage, and got into his car. Only there, in the silence, did he allow the full weight of the truth to hit him. The first sob tore from his chest, a harsh, almost animal sound. Then came the tears. Not the controlled tears he'd shed in recent days, but a deep, uncontrollable weeping that shook his entire body. He cried for the daughter he'd believed lost. He cried for the 3 years spent grieving. He cried for Caroline, who would never know their daughter had survived. He cried until there were no more tears left, until his body felt exhausted and his mind strangely light. When he finally calmed, an unexpected sensation enveloped him. Peace, not complete peace. There were still unresolved questions, difficult decisions ahead, but a peace rooted in certainty. His daughter was alive. Elijah parked in front of Clara's house an hour later. He had called her, saying only that the results were in and they needed to talk. She waited for him on the porch, anxiety etched on her face. "Lily's asleep," Clara said softly as he approached. "Gym class wore her out." Elijah nodded, sitting beside her on the wooden step. For a moment, they remained silent, watching the sky begin to darken. "It's her," Elijah finally said, his voice rough but steady. "She's Rosie." Clara closed her eyes as though bracing for the impact of his words. Though they had suspected, the scientific confirmation brought an inescapable finality. "What do we do now?" she asked, opening her eyes to meet his. Elijah took out the report and handed it to her. Clara skimmed it, then gave it back. "Before making any decisions," Elijah began carefully, "I want you to know one thing. I don't intend to take her away from you." Clara blinked in surprise. "But you're her biological father. You have all the rights, legal rights, maybe," he interjected gently. "But there's something more important than that. You're her mum, Clara. The mum who raised her and loved her while I thought she was gone. That's not something I plan on undoing." Tears shone in Clara's eyes. "But she's your daughter." "And she's yours too," Elijah echoed the words he had said days before. "We can agree that Lily, Rosie, deserves to have both of us in her life." Clara nodded slowly. "How would we do that?" It was the hardest question. Elijah inhaled deeply. "I don't want to make any drastic changes right now. Lily has a stable life with you, despite the difficulties. Pulling her out of that would be traumatic." He paused. "But I want to be present. I want to get to know her again, be a part of her life, and when the time is right, I want her to know the truth about who she is." "She's too young to understand all of this," Clara said, worried. "I agree. We don't have to tell her everything at once. We can start like we are, me as a friend of the family. Over time, when she's ready, we'll share more." Clara glanced toward the house, toward the small bedroom where Lily slept. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly, "not just of losing her, but of what this truth will do to her. How do we explain that someone tried to kill her, that she was abandoned? These are hard things for an adult to process, let alone a child." Elijah felt the weight of those questions. "I don't have all the answers, Clara, but I know that lying isn't the way. Eventually, she'll need to know." "What about the man who did this, your former business partner?" Elijah's face hardened. "Marcus is gathering evidence. Once we have enough, this will go to the police. Cole Weber will pay for what he did, for Caroline's death, for trying to harm Rosie, for stealing 3 years from us." A thoughtful silence fell between them. Night had fully descended now, and the stars were beginning to appear. "There's something else to consider," Clara finally said. "Our situation. Our life here." Elijah understood the implied concern. The contrast between the simple life Clara provided for Lily and the world of privilege he could offer. "I don't want to uproot you," he replied. "But I also can't pretend I don't have the resources to make your life better. Lily deserves a good education, healthcare, opportunities." "I don't want your charity, Elijah," Clara said, a hint of pride in her voice. "It's not charity," he said gently. "It's responsibility. To my daughter, and to the woman who saved her and raised her. Your family now, Clara, both of you." Those words seemed to disarm Clara. She looked at Elijah with new eyes, as though seeing him truly for the first time. "Are you suggesting we all live together? Like a family?" The question caught Elijah off guard. "I'm not sure we're ready for that," he answered honestly. "But I could find a better home for you, closer to where I live. A safe place with a nice yard for Lily, near a good school. You wouldn't have to work so much. You could study if you wanted. Clara appeared torn between reluctance and temptation. The chance at a better life for Lily was hard to ignore. What if she doesn't like you? Clara asked abruptly, not as a friend, but as a father. What if she blames me for not telling her sooner? What if... Risks we'll have to take, Elijah gently interrupted. But Lily's an exceptional child with an incredible heart. I believe she can handle the truth when the time's right. Clara watched him for a long moment. You already love her again, don't you? Even before you were certain. Elijah smiled sadly. I don't think I ever stopped loving her. I just learned to live with the pain of her absence. He paused, then continued. The first time I saw her, when she fell in the rain, something in me recognized her. Not logically, not rationally, but on a level I can't explain. Clara nodded, understanding. I believe it. I felt something similar when I found her. Like we were meant to find each other. Elijah studied Clara's profile in the faint glow of a distant street lamp. This woman, who had tirelessly worked to give a decent life to a child, not hers by blood, but hers in every other sense. He felt a surge of respect and gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. Thank you, he said simply. Clara turned to him. For what? For saving her, for loving her, for being the mother she needed when I couldn't be a father. Tears welled up again in Clara's eyes, but she didn't hide them. Thank you for not trying to take her away from me. Elijah reached for her hand, pressing it gently. I think we both survived the same loss, in a way. You lost your security, your home country, your future. I lost my family, my will to live, and somehow, one little girl found us and saved us both. Clara smiled through her tears. She has that power. At that moment, the house door opened, and Lily appeared. Rubbing her sleepy eyes, she wore simple star-patterned pajamas, her hair tousled. Mom, she called, before spotting Elijah. Her sleepy face lit up. Elijah, did you come to play with me? Elijah felt his heart hammering. She was his daughter, confirmed without a doubt. The urge to scoop her into his arms and say, I'm your dad, was almost unbearable. But he held back, smiling calmly. It's a bit late to play, don't you think? Shouldn't you be in bed? Lily made an adorable pout. I had a dream. There was a big house with a yard and a dog. Clara and Elijah exchanged glances. Rosie had once had a dog before the fire, a golden retriever named Max, who'd passed away 2 months before the tragedy. What a neat dream, Clara said, getting up. But now it's time to get back to bed. Can Elijah tell me a story? Lily asked. With that look Elijah remembered so well, the one that melted any resistance. If your mom allows it, he answered, glancing at Clara. Clara hesitated only a second, then nodded. A short one. As they followed Lily inside, Clara lightly touched Elijah's arm. One step at a time, she whispered. Elijah nodded, feeling a swirl of emotions so intense he could barely breathe. Joy, fear, hope, gratitude, all at once, one step at a time. That was how he would become a father again, how Lily would discover she was Rosie, how they would build a new family from the ashes of the past. And for the first time in 3 years, Elijah believed those steps would lead somewhere good. Autumn days grew shorter, and the leaves on the few neighborhood trees turned gold and fell. With the same natural progression of the changing seasons, Elijah began to be a constant figure in Lily's life. At first, his visits were brief. He'd arrive with some excuse, fixing something, bringing groceries, offering a ride. He came with a shy smile, as if asking permission to be there, even though he and Clara had already agreed on this gradual approach. Mr. Smiley is here, Lily would announce whenever she saw him pull up, running to the door before he could even knock. The nickname had come about spontaneously. Why do you always smile when you see me? She'd asked one day, with a child's candid curiosity. Caught off guard, Elijah wasn't sure what to say. How to explain that he smiled because every moment with her was a miracle he never thought he'd have again? "Because you make me happy," he answered simply. "Even when I'm grumpy," Lily teased, recalling a day she'd thrown a small tantrum over not wanting a bath. "Even then," he confirmed, ruffling her hair affectionately. The visits grew longer. Elijah began arriving earlier and staying later. One evening, he stayed for dinner. The next week, he was already helping Lily with her homework. Before long, his visits were daily occurrences. Clara observed this with mixed emotions. There was the natural fear of losing the daughter she had raised, but also genuine joy in seeing the growing bond between the two of them. And, secretly, she appreciated the moments of relief Elijah's presence provided. She was no longer alone in caring for Lily. One afternoon, while washing dishes in the kitchen, Clara heard laughter coming from the small living room. She peeked through the slightly open door. Elijah was sitting on the floor, he and Lily building something with the colorful blocks he had brought as a gift. "No, you can't put the red one on top of the green," Lily explained seriously. "Red only goes with yellow." "Ah, I see," Elijah replied, pretending to examine the situation with the same seriousness. "What about the blue one?" "Blue is special. It can go with any color." "Just like you?" Lily tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" "You're special. You make everyone feel good, no matter the color of their day." Lily laughed like he'd said something silly. "Days don't have colors, Mr. Smiley." "They do. Sad days are gray, happy days are yellow, busy days are red." "What color is today?" Lily asked, fascinated by the game. Elijah looked at her with such tenderness that Clara's heart clenched. "Today is bright blue. The best kind of day." Clara moved away from the door, discreetly wiping away a tear. Moments like these still caught her off guard, tiny instances that touched her deeply. Weeks passed, and things changed subtly. The simple house now had a new refrigerator, which Elijah insisted on buying when the old one broke. There were more books on the shelves, more fruit in the bowl, more colors in the drawings Lily taped to the walls, and there were more smiles on everyone's faces. One rainy night, when Clara was late coming home from work, Elijah stayed alone with Lily for the first time. He was nervous, even though he'd cared for her countless times in what he called his first life before the fire. "Let's have a picnic in the living room," Lily suggested when the downpour cancelled their planned trip to the park. Together, they spread a blanket on the living room floor and made simple sandwiches. Lily insisted on cutting Elijah's into triangles because grown-ups like pointy things, a logic that made him laugh. During their picnic, she bombarded him with questions about his work, his home, whether he had a dog, why he didn't have kids. "I had a daughter once," Elijah answered that last question, unable to lie completely. Lily's eyes went wide. "Where is she?" She's gone. To another country?" Elijah smiled sadly. "Something like that. Do you miss her?" "Every day." Lily fell silent, chewing her sandwich thoughtfully. Then, without warning, she stood up and sat in his lap, hugging him around the neck. "Don't be sad. You can borrow me and Mom," she said with the profound simplicity of children. Elijah hugged her back, fighting tears. "Thank you, Lily. That means so much to me." When Clara arrived, she found them both asleep on the couch, Lily curled against Elijah's chest, safe in his arms. She stood by the door for a moment, taking in a scene that felt so right yet so fragile. And over time, Elijah started taking part in little everyday events he had once taken for granted. Parent-teacher meetings at Lily's school, rehearsals for a Mother's Day presentation, where Lily nearly revealed the handmade gift she was making for Clara, a trip to the dentist, where he distracted Lily with ridiculous stories about alien toothbrushes. Each moment was a rediscovery of how to be a father, how to love without smothering, how to protect without limiting, how to care so deeply that it sometimes physically hurt. One night, while Lily slept, Elijah and Clara talked quietly in the kitchen. She asked you about painting her room purple, Clara said. You said yes without even blinking. Elijah smiled. It's just paint. Yesterday it was roller skates, before that a giant puzzle, and now purple paint. Clara shook her head, but was smiling. You're spoiling her. A little, he admitted. It's hard not to want to give her the world. Clara studied him for a moment. You're different. When we met, there was a darkness in you. Now, sometimes, it's like you shine. Elijah thought about it. It was true. Something within him was awakening. Parts he believed had died in the fire along with Caroline and, he had thought, Rosie. She reminds me what it's like to live, he said simply. Not just exist, but really live. One Saturday afternoon, Elijah took Lily to a nearby park so she could play on the swings. Clara stayed behind, enjoying a rare moment of rest. As he pushed Lily on the swing, listening to her gleeful shrieks to go higher, Elijah experienced sudden clarity. He would never be the man he was before the fire. That version of him had died in the flames along with Caroline and what he'd believed to be Rosie. But he was no longer the man devastated by 3 years of grief, living like a shadow. He was someone new. Someone who knew the pain of loss, but also the indescribable joy of a second chance. Someone who could smile again, genuinely, deeply, when a 5-year-old called him Mr. Smiley and climbed into his lap without hesitation, trusting him completely. Higher, Elijah. I want to touch the sky. Hold on tight then, he replied, pushing the swing again. And as he watched Lily soar higher, laughing freely, Elijah felt his own heart lift with her. Marcus Hampton's office was in an old building in the less affluent part of town. It lacked the sophistication of downtown's mirrored towers, but it offered the privacy his investigative work required, a place where clients could come and go unnoticed. Elijah climbed 3 flights of stairs, ignoring an elevator that seemed as old as the building itself. He knocked twice on a door with frosted glass reading Hampton Investigations in worn gold letters. Come in, came Marcus's familiar voice from inside. The office was surprisingly orderly, considering the multitude of documents spread across a wooden desk. Maps, newspaper clippings and photographs hung on the walls, forming a mosaic of information connected by red string, a method that might have seemed old-fashioned, but Marcus always found it effective. You look better, Marcus noted, motioning to the chair in front of his desk. Less haunted. Elijah managed a weak smile. Things are settling with Lily. Clara and I are finding our balance. Good, Marcus nodded. But that's not why I asked you to come so urgently. The ex-cop picked up a thick folder on his desk, its edges crammed with colored sticky notes. It looked well thumbed. You asked me to investigate Cole Weber, to see if he was involved in the fire and Rosie's disappearance, Marcus began, his voice taking on a professional tone. I started with the financial records, as I always do. Follow the money, and you usually find the answer. What did you find? Elijah sat up straighter, tension radiating through him. Marcus opened the folder. Over the last 3 years, since you stepped away from managing Marshall Technologies, there's been a systematic pattern of fund diversion. Small enough amounts not to draw immediate attention, but they add up to nearly $70 million. $70 million? Elijah was stunned. How did the auditors miss that? It was cleverly disguised as R&D investments into shell subsidiaries. Marcus slid some documents across the desk. Look at these companies: Quantum Innovations, Nexus Research Group, Arcadia Technologies. They exist only on paper. They were created with perfect documentation, but have no real operations. Elijah examined the pages, disbelief giving way to anger. And Cole is behind this. Directly? No. He's too smart to leave such obvious fingerprints. Marcus pulled more documents from the folder. But after the money moved through these shell corporations, it ended up in offshore accounts that eventually funded 2 main destinations: a personal account in the Cayman Islands, controlled by Cole through proxies, and financing for Prometheus Labs. Prometheus Labs? The name sparked immediate recognition for Elijah. Cole's personal project I refused to fund 4 years ago. Marcus nodded gravely. Exactly. From what I've gathered, it's an experimental high-risk tech project you deemed unethical at the time. Elijah stood, too restless to remain seated upon hearing this. He began pacing the small office, trying to process the implications. Cole was siphoning money from my own company to fund a project I explicitly rejected, he muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. But it still doesn't connect him directly to the fire or Rosie. Not directly, Marcus concurred. But look at this. He slid more documents across the desk, bank transfers, all dated a few weeks before the fire. 5 payments of $200,000 each to a company called Centauri Security Solutions. Know what they do? Elijah shook his head. Officially, corporate security consulting. Unofficially, they're known to provide permanent solutions for complicated problems. Marcus gave Elijah a meaningful look. They're mercenaries, Elijah. Guns for hire, willing to do anything for a price. A chill ran down Elijah's spine. You're saying Cole hired assassins? I'm saying he paid a substantial amount to a group known for shady operations just weeks before the fire that killed your wife and supposedly your daughter, Marcus said calmly, but the impact of his words was undeniable. Elijah sat again, suddenly feeling weak. Why, Cole was my best friend. We built this company together, out of my garage. He was Rosie's godfather. We don't always understand people's motivations, even those closest to us, Marcus said. But I have a theory. The ex-cop lifted a framed newspaper clipping from the wall. It was an old Forbes cover, showing Elijah smiling under the headline, "A Billionaire Visionary, How Elijah Marshall is Revolutionizing Technology." Notice anything interesting in this piece? Marcus asked. Elijah examined the image, confused. It's from 5 years ago when we launched our AI system. Yes. And in the 6-page article, Cole Weber's name appears only twice, both in passing as Marshall's associate. Marcus set aside the clipping. Cole was always in your shadow, Elijah. You were the face, the mind, the visionary. He was the other guy. The revelation sank heavily. Memories flashed. Cole's bitter remarks about media attention, his insistence on being included in interviews, his resentment whenever Elijah was praised at corporate events. I also found email records, Marcus continued, taking out more documents from that seemingly bottomless folder. Exchanges between Cole and potential investors for Prometheus Labs. In multiple messages, he complains about how you blocked the greatest technological revolution of the century due to exaggerated scruples. He was obsessed with that project, Elijah. Elijah read bits and pieces of the emails. Cole's bitterness was palpable. Harsh words, accusations, vows to prove he was right, with or without Elijah's help. In the last email here, 2 weeks before the fire, he wrote to an investor, "Soon I'll have full control of Marshall Technologies and unlimited resources for Prometheus. Expect transformative news." Marcus paused, letting the words sink in. He planned everything, Elijah murmured, voice barely audible. The fire, killing my family, all of it just to take over the company. That's how it looks, Marcus confirmed gravely. With you emotionally devastated and withdrawn, he became interim CEO. The shares you retained fell under the management of a board he effectively controlled. It was a calculated plan. But Rosie survived. That probably wasn't in the plan. Based on what I've pieced together, someone hired by Centauri likely removed her from the house before the fire, maybe intending to eliminate the child separately in a way that looked like an unrelated abduction. But something went wrong. And they just left her at a church. The incredulity in Elijah's voice was clear. Marcus shrugged. Mercenaries have strange lines they won't cross. Some refuse to kill children. Others get nervous when plans change. Maybe the person assigned to deal with Rosie had a crisis of conscience. Elijah stood again, anger finally overtaking the shock. "I'll destroy him, Marcus. I'll make sure Cole pays for every second of the suffering he caused." "We have to be strategic," Marcus cautioned. "Cole is powerful. He has connections, influence. If he suspects we know, it could be dangerous, especially for Clara and Lily." The mention of their names immediately cooled Elijah's rage. "You're right. I need to protect them first." "I've already taken some precautions," Marcus assured him. "I've got a trusted man watching their house discreetly, but it would be safer if they moved somewhere Cole doesn't know about, at least until we settle this." Elijah nodded, now focused on the safety of the family he'd recently rediscovered. "I'll talk to Clara tonight. I have an apartment owned by a holding company no one associates with me. They can stay there for now." "Good." Marcus closed the folder and handed it to Elijah. "Everything I've found is in here. I have backup copies, of course." "What now?" Elijah asked, holding the folder like it was explosive. "We keep gathering evidence. We need something concrete linking Cole directly to the fire, something even the best lawyer can't refute." Marcus stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "In the meantime, stay close to Clara and Lily. Cole mustn't find out about them." The drive back home was a blur for Elijah. His mind was a whirlwind of memories reinterpreted. Every conversation with Cole, every argument, every shared moment now seemed tainted by betrayal. He recalled the day they met in college, two ambitious young men dreaming of changing the world through technology. The nights spent perfecting their first prototype, the celebrations when they secured initial funding, the genuine hug when the company finally took off. How could someone he'd considered a brother devise something so monstrous? The answer lay partly in the documents Marcus had compiled. Over the years, Cole's resentment had grown silently. Elijah's refusal to fund the Prometheus project seemed to be the final spark. That project, promising revolutionary AI breakthroughs, had ethical implications Elijah deemed unacceptable. "It's basically creating unrestricted artificial consciousness, Cole," Elijah remembered arguing in that fateful meeting. "We can't open this Pandora's box without safeguards." "You're strangling innovation with your morals," Cole had replied, furious. "We could be decades ahead of the competition." Now that argument seemed more than just a professional disagreement. It was the start of a terrible plan that ended in the destruction of Elijah's family. When Elijah parked outside Clara's house, it was late afternoon. He saw Lily playing in the small front yard, under Clara's watchful eye. The domestic scene, so ordinary and yet so precious, brought him back to the present. For 3 years, he had lived in a limbo of pain, unaware his daughter was alive, that a chance at happiness still existed. Cole had stolen that from him, and he had nearly stolen so much more. As Elijah stepped out of the car, he forced a smile. He wouldn't let Lily sense his inner turmoil. He wouldn't let Cole endanger this second chance. If before he'd been driven by the quest for truth, now he was absolutely determined by the need for justice, and above all else, by the need to protect the ones he loved. "Elijah!" Lily ran toward him, arms open for a hug. "Did you bring candy?" He lifted her in his arms, feeling her small body warm against his chest, a reminder of what truly mattered. "Not today, little one, but I brought something better." He looked at Clara, and who approached with a cautious smile. "I brought an idea for an adventure. What do you think about a little trip? Maybe a temporary change of scenery?" Lily's eyes lit up with childlike excitement at anything new. Clara, however, immediately sensed something serious had happened. "Let's talk inside," she suggested, giving Elijah a questioning look. He nodded, setting Lily down. "Go put away your toys. We've got a lot to plan." As Lily dashed indoors, Elijah lightly touched Clara's arm. "I found out who did it," he said softly. "And he can't find out about you two, not yet." Clara's face hardened with resolve. She was a woman who had faced many challenges, and Elijah knew he could count on her strength now. "What do we need to do?" she asked simply. "Protect our daughter," Elijah answered, "and then seek justice." The skyscraper that housed Marshall Technologies' headquarters reflected the late afternoon sun, its mirrored windows gleaming like liquid fire. It had been 5 years since Elijah last set foot in that building. 5 years since he'd walked the corridors of the company he had built. This time, he didn't go through the main reception. Marcus had procured a maintenance badge and led him through a service entrance. The plan was simple: get to Cole's private office without being noticed. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Marcus asked as they rode the service elevator. "We could just hand over the evidence to the police." Elijah adjusted the small recorder in his jacket pocket. "I need to hear it from him, Marcus. I need to look into the eyes of the man who destroyed my family." Marcus nodded in understanding. He knew this confrontation was necessary not just for the case, but for Elijah's own closure. The elevator stopped on the executive floor, where the halls were silent at the end of the workday. Following the building layout they both knew well, they reached Cole's outer office. The secretary had gone home, leaving the path clear. "I'll be right here," Marcus said, positioning himself discreetly by the door. "If you need anything—" "I won't," Elijah interrupted. "This is between me and him." Taking a steadying breath, Elijah opened the door without knocking. Cole Weber was seated behind an imposing mahogany desk, focused on his computer screen. At 45, he still maintained that impeccable image: perfectly cut brown hair, an Italian suit, a discreet yet obviously expensive watch. When the door opened, he looked up irritably at the interruption. The shock on his face at seeing Elijah was momentary but obvious. For a split second, he looked like he was seeing a ghost. Then he composed himself, a near-genuine smile replacing the surprise. "Elijah." His voice was controlled, professional. "What an extraordinary surprise." "I'm sure it is." Elijah closed the door behind him. Cole stood, walking around the desk with arms outstretched, as though to embrace an old friend. "It's been so long. 3 years with no contact, and now you appear out of the blue. I tried reaching out so many times." Elijah remained unmoving, his gaze hard. Cole stopped halfway, sensing something was wrong. "I'm not here for nostalgia, Cole." A heavy silence settled between them. Cole took a few steps back, studying Elijah carefully. "Then to what do I owe the honor?" "Centauri Security Solutions," Elijah said simply. The name hung in the air like a weapon. The change in Cole's expression was subtle, a fleeting tension in his jaw, a barely perceptible catch in his breathing. To most observers, he might have seemed only puzzled. But Elijah, who had known him for over 20 years, recognized the calculation in his eyes. "Never heard of them," Cole said, returning to his desk. "Some new competitor in the market. 5 payments of $200,000 each. 3 weeks before the fire that killed my wife," Elijah said in a calm, almost clinical tone. "Interesting how the money came from a fund only you controlled." Cole sat in his chair, folding his hands on the desk. "I see you've taken an interest in the business again. Glad to hear it. But I must say I'm confused by these accusations." "I'm not here to play, Cole." Elijah finally moved closer, placing his hands on the desk and leaning in. "I know everything. Prometheus, the embezzlement. Centauri, the deactivated security system that night." Something shifted in Cole's face. The feigned confusion was gone, replaced by a cold assessment, as if recalculating a complex equation. "Interesting theory," he said at last, leaning back in his chair. "But without proof, it's just a grieving man's speculation. I have more than enough proof." Elijah sat now, facing his old friend. "Emails, bank records, witnesses. Forensic auditors are tracing every cent you stole over the last 3 years." A muscle twitched in Cole's jaw, the first real sign of concern. "What do you want, Elijah? Money?" "Your position back." "I want the truth," Elijah replied. "I want to hear why you betrayed our friendship, why you murdered Caroline, why you tried to kill my daughter." Cole scoffed, a humorless sound. "Your daughter died in that fire, Elijah. We all know that. Rosie is alive." The words fell between them like a bomb. For the first time, Cole appeared genuinely shocked. "Impossible," he whispered. "She survived. Someone took her from the house before the fire and abandoned her. For 3 years, I thought she was dead, while she grew up with another family." Elijah leaned forward. "So I'll ask you again. Why, Cole?" The silence that followed was long and suffocating. Cole looked out the window at the city skyline, as if seeking answers in the fiery sunset. Finally, he turned to Elijah, all pretense gone from his face. "Why do you think—" His voice was different now, colder, harsher. "Because you had everything. The credit, the fame, the headlines. Elijah Marshall, the visionary genius, while I was just a footnote. We built this company together," Elijah objected, incredulous. "Did we?" Cole snapped. "I worked as hard as you, sacrificed as much. But who did the world know? Who did the investors chase? Who got all the doors opened?" There was a bitterness almost tangible in his words, nurtured by years of silent resentment. "And when I finally had my own vision, my own revolutionary project, you shut it down," Cole gestured angrily. "Prometheus would have put us decades ahead of everyone else. But your moral concerns stood in the way. That project had dangerous ethical implications," Elijah replied quietly. "It was practically a digital bioweapon. It was the future." Cole slammed his fist on the desk. "And you stood in the way of the future." Elijah looked at the man who had once been like a brother. "So you decided to remove me. By killing my family." Cole sat again, suddenly composed. "It was effective, wasn't it? You vanished, completely withdrew, and I finally steered the company in the right direction. Caroline died. Collateral damage," Cole said coldly. "I had nothing personal against her." "And Rosie?" Elijah asked, his voice almost breaking. "An innocent 5-year-old. A flicker of something, perhaps guilt, crossed Cole's face, the closest he might be to remorse. The plan wasn't to hurt the kid. They were supposed to take her out, stage an abduction, then handle it away from there." "Handle it?" Elijah repeated, disgusted. "Business is business, Elijah," Cole replied, as if explaining something obvious. "I didn't know they'd leave her alive. That wasn't part of the deal." He shrugged. "Not that I particularly cared either way." In that moment, Elijah saw clearly what years of jealousy and frustrated ambition had done to his old friend. Cole Weber was no longer the idealistic young man who'd once started a company in a garage with him. He was something unrecognizable, rotted from the inside out. "You know what's ironic?" Cole went on, a cold smile curling his lips. "It worked. Everything worked exactly as planned. The company thrived under my leadership. Prometheus is nearly complete. You were forgotten." He leaned forward. "And I won." Elijah stood slowly. "No, Cole. You lost. You lost your humanity, your integrity. And now you'll lose your freedom." "Empty threats," Cole dismissed with a wave. "You have nothing tying me directly to the fire." "I have all I need." Elijah pulled the small recorder from his pocket, switching it off. "Including your confession." Cole's face visibly paled. "That won't—" "The authorities are already on their way," Elijah interrupted, heading for the door. "I won't be here to watch. I've seen enough." As he reached the door, Cole called after him. "Elijah?" He paused, not turning around. "It won't work, you know," Cole said, his voice taking on a desperate, almost pleading tone. "I have the best lawyers, connections. I'll claim the recording was manipulated, that you coerced me." Elijah glanced over his shoulder one last time at the man he once called friend. "Try." Outside the building, Elijah handed the recorder to Marcus, who waited with a police detective. His hands trembled slightly. "You all right?" Marcus asked, concerned. "No," Elijah answered honestly, "but I will be." The detective examined the device. "Along with the documentation you've provided, this should be enough for an immediate arrest warrant." "Do whatever you need to do," Elijah said simply. "I just want justice. Not revenge, Marcus asked quietly as the detective walked away to make calls. Elijah looked up at the night sky, thinking of Clara and Lily, safe in the new apartment. Revenge won't bring Caroline back. It won't erase the 3 years I lost with my daughter. Justice gives us closure. A new start. The following weeks were a whirlwind of testimonies, court hearings, and sensational headlines. Marshall Technologies' CEO arrested for murder and fraud made the front pages. The empire Cole had built began to crumble as more evidence of his illicit activities surfaced. Elijah kept Clara and Lily away from the spotlight. They remained in the secure apartment, protected from the ravenous media desperate for an exclusive story about the resurrected founder's daughter. On the final day of Cole's trial, after weeks of reviewing evidence and testimonies, Elijah sat in the front row of the courtroom. To his surprise, Clara entered quietly, holding Lily's hand. They took seats beside him without a word. "You didn't have to come," he whispered. "We did," Clara replied simply, "for Caroline, for you, for all of us." Lily, wearing a simple blue dress, looked around curiously. "Why is that man in a box?" she asked, pointing to the defendant's stand. "Because he did very bad things," Clara explained gently, "and now he has to answer for them." Cole, seated beside his lawyer, looked like a shadow of the powerful man he once was. When he saw Lily, his eyes widened in recognition. The resemblance to Rosie's photos he'd seen was unmistakable. For a brief moment, his gaze met Elijah's. There was no remorse, only a bitter resignation. When the judge entered and the court rose, Clara discreetly touched Elijah's arm. "It's going to be okay," she murmured. "We're here." The trial proceeded with the solemnity of the judicial system. Evidence was reviewed one final time. Closing arguments were made. Finally, after only 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with the verdict. In the case of the state versus Cole Weber, regarding the charges of first-degree murder, attempted murder, corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, the jury finds the defendant. Time seemed to slow as the word hung in the air. Guilty. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Cole remained impassive, staring straight ahead. The judge called for silence and proceeded with sentencing, life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs approached to take Cole away, he finally turned to Elijah. His lips moved, forming words only Elijah could read. "You still don't know everything." Before Elijah could process that cryptic message, Cole was led out of the courtroom. The chapter was closed, yet those final words left an uneasy echo. Outside, reporters swarmed, desperate for statements. Marcus appeared, clearing a path through the throng to a waiting car on the street. "This way," he indicated. "We can slip out the back." "No," Elijah replied, surprising them all. "We won't hide anymore." He looked at Clara, who nodded in silent agreement. With Lily between them, holding both their hands, they descended the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed relentlessly. Questions were shouted from all directions, but they kept walking, united like a family. At the curb, Clara paused and looked at Elijah. Wordlessly, she reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. A simple gesture, but laden with meaning. Trust, partnership, maybe the beginning of something more. Elijah felt the warmth of that hand, the same that had cared for his daughter all those years, the same that now offered him a new beginning. He squeezed gently, a silent thank you, a promise. Together, with Lily between them, they walked toward the future, leaving behind the courthouse where justice had finally been served. Still, Cole's last words lingered like a distant echo in Elijah's mind. "You still don't know everything." Spring arrived in full force, bringing colors that seemed even brighter after the long winter. In a quiet residential neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, a small 2-story house with a porch stood out not for its size, but for its front yard, meticulously tended, where newly planted flowers were beginning to bloom. Elijah stood watering the flower beds, watching Lily chase an orange butterfly around the yard. She wore denim overalls and a bright yellow t-shirt, radiating energy and joy, her light brown hair gleaming in the morning sun. 3 months had passed since Cole's trial. 3 months of rebuilding, adjusting, and starting anew. "You're not watering the roses," Clara pointed out as she came out the front door with a tray of lemonade. "They're turning yellow," Elijah smiled, directing the hose toward the rose bushes. "Still learning. I've never had a garden before." "Never?" Lily paused her butterfly chase and came closer, curious. "Not even when you were little?" "I lived in an apartment in the city," Elijah explained. "We only had a few potted plants on the balcony." Clara set the lemonade on the porch table and sat on the step, watching them. These small, everyday moments still surprised her, the ease with which they formed a family, even after everything that had happened. The move to this new home took place a month after the trial. Elijah chose it carefully, a modest but comfortable place, with a big yard and roomy bedrooms. It wasn't a mansion like the one he used to own, nor did it need to be. It was a home meant for comfort and security, not show. "I want to show you something," Lily exclaimed suddenly, dropping the small watering can she was using to mimic Elijah. "Don't look until I come back." She dashed inside, leaving Clara and Elijah alone on the porch. "How was the meeting with the lawyers?" Clara asked, handing him a glass of lemonade. Elijah took the drink, sitting next to her on the step. "Exhausting. Restructuring the company will take time, but at least we've shut down all those questionable projects Cole started." "What about Prometheus?" "Completely discontinued. Some of the tech developed will be donated to academic research, with proper ethical oversight." He took a sip. It was strange going back to boardrooms after all this time. Clara studied him. "Will you return permanently?" "Not the way I used to," Elijah said, looking up at the clear sky. "We've set up a strong board of directors. I'll supervise major decisions, but I'm not diving into the daily grind. My priorities are different now." His gaze drifted to the door Lily had disappeared through, and Clara smiled, understanding perfectly. In the early days after they moved, they had an unspoken agreement not to rush anything. Elijah had his own bedroom, separate from Clara's. Lily continued calling him Elijah, and he didn't push for more. The truth of his identity had been explained to her in simple terms. Elijah was her biological father, who lost her when she was a baby, and now had found her again. "Just like you have 2 moms, one in heaven and one here," Clara had explained. "You also have 2 dads." Lily accepted it with the surprising adaptability children often show. She occasionally asked questions about Caroline, about the house where she was born, about how Elijah lost her, and they answered carefully, shielding her from the darkest details. "Ready?" Lily's voice interrupted their thoughts. She stood at the door, something hidden behind her back. "Ready?" Elijah said, putting down the hose. With a dramatic flourish, Lily unveiled a large sheet of drawing paper. "Ta-da! I made this at school today." The drawing, done in crayons and markers, showed 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a yellow house with a big green yard. Above them, in bright, uneven letters, it read, "My family." Clara took the drawing carefully. "It's beautiful, honey." "The teacher asked us to draw our family," Lily explained proudly. "Jenny said it's weird that I have 2 homes, but I told her it's not weird, it's special." Elijah knelt to her level. "You're right. It's very special." Lily pointed at the figures. "That's Mom, that's me, and that's you." Something clenched in Elijah's chest when he noticed that the figure representing him was labeled Daddy in bright blue letters. "Lily," he began, but emotion constricted his throat. The girl tilted her head, confused by his reaction. "Is it wrong? The teacher said we can call our parents whatever we want, and Jenny calls hers Dad, not Daddy. But I like Daddy better." Clara and Elijah exchanged glances, both with tearful eyes. "It's not wrong," Elijah managed. "It just surprised me." "A good surprise. So can I call you Daddy now?" Lily asked directly, in that childlike, straightforward way. If you want to, nothing would make me happier. Lily beamed, as if she'd solved a tricky puzzle. Good, because it was tiring to think of you as Daddy in my head and call you Elijah out loud. With that pragmatic statement, she took back her drawing and ran inside, announcing she'd find tape to hang it on the fridge beside her other artwork. Left alone again, Clara lightly touched Elijah's arm. "You're crying." He wiped his face, almost surprised. "I guess I am. She's fully accepted you." "I think so." He turned to Clara, expression open and vulnerable. "And you? How do you feel about that?" Clara looked out at the yard for a moment before answering. "When I found her at that church, I promised myself I'd do anything to protect her and make her happy. If that means sharing her with her real father, a good man who loves her as much as I do, then I'm at peace with it." Elijah took her hand, a gesture that had become increasingly natural in recent months. "You are her real mother, Clara. Blood doesn't define that. Love does. The day-to-day care, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, everything you've done all these years. Thank you for understanding," she said quietly, "for not trying to take her from me. I'd never do that." Elijah squeezed her hand gently. "When I thought Rosie was gone, I lost everything, finding her again as Lily gave me more than I ever expected. Not just my daughter back, but a new family." Their eyes locked, and there was a mutual understanding there, a respect, gratitude, and maybe something more that was growing slowly, without haste. The moment was broken by Lily's return, carrying a roll of tape almost bigger than her hands. "Come on, Mom, come on, Daddy. Let's stick it on the fridge." That word, Daddy, still sounded like music to Elijah's ears. They both got up and followed the little girl inside, still holding hands. In the cozy kitchen, they watched Lily, tongue poking out in concentration, carefully tape her drawing to the fridge door. The image of 3 figures holding hands smiled back at them. "Perfect," Lily declared, stepping back to admire her work. "Yes," Elijah agreed, looking not at the drawing but at Lily and Clara. "Perfect." Later, after Lily was asleep, Elijah and Clara sat on the porch swing, watching the stars come out in the darkening sky. The fragrance of freshly watered flowers filled the cool night air. "You know," Clara said thoughtfully, "when I was a girl, I always dreamed of having a garden, a place to plant things and watch them grow. And now you have one," Elijah noted. "Yes," she smiled, "but I've realized the real garden isn't the flowers or the trees." "No?" Clara glanced back at the house, where the soft glow of Lily's bedside lamp was still on. "The real garden is the people we cultivate in our lives, the ones we water with love, protect, watch grow and flourish." Elijah followed her gaze. "A garden of 3 people." "Yes." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, a new gesture, still shy but natural. "A garden of 3. As the swing moved gently under the starry sky, Elijah reflected on the path that had brought them here. Pain, loss, rebirth. He thought of Caroline, who would always be part of his story, of Cole, whose betrayal had changed many lives, of Marcus, whose loyalty had helped uncover the truth. But above all, he thought of Clara and Lily, strangers who had become the center of his world, a family forged not by fate or blood alone, but by conscious choice, by genuine love, by the determination to transform tragedy into a new chance. There, in that blossoming garden, 3 intertwined lives created something new and precious, a family, growing together under the same sky, nurtured by the same love, rooted in the same soil, a garden of 3, flourishing in the spring of a brand new beginning.